Why are we lost in the mind? You want to just turn your mind off, to stop the compulsive stream of thoughts relentlessly flooding your head, but you can't. It just keeps going. Why? Why are we lost in the mind? Maybe you decided you want to live in the present moment, only to realize that your full attention is almost still constantly wrapped up in a whirlwind of thought without you even knowing it most of the time, while life passes all around you. Why is this, and what can we do about it? This is a huge question, which I've been exploring actively for 15 years now, and I'd like to open the door wide to explore it with you. I feel like some things have recently snapped into focus for me, already transforming my relationship with my mind, so I'm putting in the effort to really articulate everything I've discovered as clearly as possible in the hopes that it can contribute to a larger conversation on this essential question. In the previous video in this series for demystifying and harmonizing the ego and the mind, we talked about how the mind makes conceptual models to represent different aspects of reality, and how we often confuse these low-resolution conceptual models with reality itself. How we often pay more attention to the story we're telling about life than to life itself. How we pay more attention to our thoughts about what's happening than to what's actually happening. We discovered one of the biggest reasons why we think constantly when we considered the mismatch between how complex reality is and our mind's ability to represent it. Obviously, reality is infinitely complex, and the mind feels the need to figure out all of it, which is obviously an impossible task, which keeps the mind in overdrive. I think this is a great starting point for understanding why we think compulsively, but I feel like we need to drill down even farther. So we can ask the same question again: why are we lost in the mind? Why are we lost in thought? And try to hit it again from a fresh new angle. Or we could ask what we just discovered in a question form: why is it that the mind feels the need to figure everything out? For me, one question feeds into the other and brings me to a similar place. So we'll take these questions from multiple angles, go several layers deep in the analysis, and then flip the question on its head in a way that might surprise you. We're going to explore this really deeply, but first, I'd love to hear your unfiltered first thoughts about why you think we get lost in the mind. You might come at this from a completely different angle than I do, and so by getting your thoughts before having them colored by my way of thinking, we might find some really fresh new insights. So please leave them in the comments if that sounds good to you. I'll just play a little bit of violin, some pondering music to help you think about the question. And just try not to get distracted reading other people's comments. Let's get your first stuff out there. Ready? Let's go. So why are we lost in thoughts? I think there are lots of reasons, so this will be an ongoing exploration. But I think a lot of it can maybe be boiled down to a complex interaction of two main factors, each of which have many different dimensions and parts to them. The first is that integrating the total human system is complex and challenging. And two, we're scared. As fragile and finite creatures, we have deep fears and insecurities, and the mind gives us concepts for all of these fears, and obviously we'd like to do something about them, yet we're unfamiliar with how to integrate the thinking mind into that process, so it often amplifies the fears rather than the solutions. Add to that we tend to constrict and limit our deep human intelligence through the bottleneck of conscious thinking, even though our subconscious minds are capable of processing a lot of information behind the scenes, under the surface, and synthesizing it into something elegant that it can then produce for the conscious mind to notice. We might call these flashes of insight, and you've almost certainly experienced this before. A flash of insight can appear in an instant, yet be so detailed that it would take literally hours to explain in words. This is one aspect of what I mean by needing to harmonize or integrate better the mind into this total complex human system. It seems to me we'd like to train our minds to work quietly in the background, leaving our conscious attention open to notice our world inside and out, our sense perceptions, the feelings in our body, sights, sounds, smells, what people are saying, and trust that the subconscious mind will process what it needs to process and present us with the solutions at the right time. We could still, of course, choose to contemplate something deeply, to bring our full attention to that conceptual layer, but only at the times when it's appropriate and desirable for working something out on that level. This seems way better to me than having our conscious awareness constantly wrapped up in thoughts, whether we like it or not, largely unaware of what's happening around us as we talk through things word by word in our heads at a processing speed so slow that it's unlikely to ever get us an insight as clear as when the subconscious works on it for us. So again, we could ask why? Why do we talk through things word by word in our minds rather than focusing on it briefly and then letting it go and trusting our subconscious minds? Talking through things in our minds seems to give us a false sense of control and security, but funnels all of our attention into our thoughts, completely disconnecting us from everything else that's happening in the world around us, which ironically makes us less safe than if we were to just relax the thinking and pay more attention to what's going on. The analytical mind feels safer in its models of reality than in the real world that the models represent. To let go of these conceptual models would mean contending with the chaos of reality and accepting how few things can really be understood and controlled. It's scary to admit that the model of reality is incomplete and often wrong. On some level, we might feel it's more responsible to keep thinking about everything, to just think and think and think, even though it's not. Some part of us would rather live in a prison of our own making than step fully into a reality which is infinitely beyond our comprehension. Luckily, the thinking mind was never meant to contend with the whole of reality. It's a very powerful tool, but we have many tools at our disposition. We tend to forget about and neglect the other tools, forcing the thinking mind to take on an impossible and stressful task. It's like forcing the star player of a team to carry the entire team, even though teamwork is required for success. We humans, with our many primal instincts, emotions, thoughts, and intuitions, are super complex and undoubtedly a challenge to integrate. We have many different motivational systems, each looking out for different needs and often pulling us in different directions. But occasionally, we glimpse just how powerful we can be when all of these motivational systems are united to pull in a common direction. We could call this self-integration or yoga, which means union. I personally prefer the word harmony because of the way it implies a more dynamic quality, always in motion, where it's normal for these different motivational systems to be pulling against each other in a constant dance of tension and resolution, consonance and dissonance, dissonance and consonance, tension and release. The conceptualizing mind is super sophisticated and, in evolutionary terms, relatively new biotechnology. From what we understand about the evolution of the brain, the human abilities to analyze, conceptualize, plan, build tools, and think abstractly is a recent development made possible by our larger prefrontal cortex interacting in a really sophisticated way with the older brain regions. I'm not a neuroscientist, just an enthusiast, and obviously leaders in the field of neuroscience are constantly making new discoveries, so I'm not going to try to talk more technically than that about that right now. Hopefully at some point we can have an expert on the Harmonious Reality podcast to go deeper into this. I only mention it to say that we also have many sophisticated systems for navigating this world that have nothing to do with the reasoning skills that we often depend on. Our larger prefrontal cortex, which neuroscientists agree is central for our reasoning abilities, has not existed for very long, and this unique ability we have to conceptualize and analyze is not the only form of intelligence, though we tend to treat it as such. There's a much deeper and more instinctual intelligence below the level of conscious thought, which we can tap into, but we're mostly disconnected from it. even insects and animals with tiny brains and no prefrontal cortex to speak of have the ability to execute complex tasks and respond dynamically to a dangerous world. They even have the deep innate ability to fight and defend themselves, each with a complex and unique fighting style. Martial arts masters have even studied the fighting styles of insects and animals and developed martial arts styles to imitate them. This is an amazing example of innate pre-conscious intelligence. The insect or animal doesn't consciously know that it knows martial arts. It doesn't have a concept for that, but it knows it on a much deeper level. It knows it in its entire body, and that ability comes out when the situation draws it out of it. It's unlikely that migrating animals have a conscious concept of where they're going and when, but they instinctually know in their bodies exactly where and when to go. Some animals instinctively store away food for the future. And many animals have complex mating rituals, which they were never taught, but somehow know how to do. We humans also have a deep, visceral intelligence, which is often eclipsed by our overthinking minds. The ability to plan and think abstractly is amazing and super powerful, so I suppose maybe it's not surprising that we're overly fascinated by this relatively new ability that we have. I mean, we figured out a lot of what it's good for, but maybe we haven't totally understood all of the problems that could be caused by overusing it, and how much its overuse really disconnects us from our deeper intelligence. We also have the amazing ability to imagine any sense perception. We can project an image or a sound or a taste or a feeling from our memories and from our mental models into our conscious awareness with varying degrees of clarity. I mean, people even say that our bodies can't tell the difference between what we experience in real life and what we vividly imagine. Now, this is fascinating and can be very useful. For example, mentally practicing instruments is a great technique, but it's also a double-edged sword that can keep us in a certain feedback loop of fear. We're scared. We're scared of dying, scared of getting hurt, scared of suffering, of not having our needs met, of not being enough, of not being loved, scared of feeling our feelings and the deep pain that we carry, both individually and collectively. And we're scared of our dark side, of our shadow, and what we might do if left completely unchecked. Without concepts and imagination of these fears, we would only feel fear in a moment of danger and only feel the distress of getting hurt or having unmet needs in the moment that it's happening. So having concepts and memory of these things may allow us to avoid them sometimes in real life, but it also allows us to keep them constantly present, fearing them even when they are not happening to us, and imagining the distress of something traumatic that's not happening, yet projecting it into our awareness as if it were. Just trying to figure out everything that's actually happening would be way too much for our minds, not to mention constantly imagining our deepest fears. Thinking can also be a way of avoiding feeling things that we are afraid to feel. We have powerful emotions, and we have a lot of pain collectively and individually. We feel deeply, and we hurt deeply. The mind allows us to compartmentalize some of that pain to a certain degree. To let go of the thinking mind feels like being stripped raw to feel all of it in its full intensity, and that can be scary. We're also scared of our shadow or our dark side. We humans can do absolutely horrifying things. Can you really trust yourself to let go completely? Some instincts and impulses may serve an evolutionary purpose, but are maladapted for large-scale social, societal cohesion, and have to be controlled or inhibited or redirected or integrated, harmonized in some way. This is what Carl Sagan called dangerous evolutionary baggage. We can't just freely express sexual, territorial, or violent instincts. We just can't go up and have our way with anyone that sexually excites us. We can't physically attack someone who makes us mad. And I can't just go take something that I want if it doesn't belong to me. Part of us may want to act on these impulses, but they have to be redirected somehow in order to be a functioning member of a society. This is part of what I mean when I say we have many different motivations, often pulling us in different directions. The thinking mind also feels responsible to manage all of these different impulses. But what if it's not the thinking mind's job to do that? We often don't even do what we think we want to do, so it's not obvious to me that the thinking mind even can manage them. What if there's a space of awareness where all of these impulses and motivations and thoughts and feelings and intuitions can all coexist and be harmonized into cohesive action, but without the mental strain? The mind may rarely admit that it's out of its depths, but it feels it. The mind makes us conceptually aware of our own mortality, our fragility, our ability to suffer, our darkness, and the complexity of existence, and then feels it needs to do something about it. Now, these are deep insecurities. For most of us, it's hard to admit and accept that we will die someday. Death is the only thing that's truly guaranteed to us, yet the hardest thing for our mind to grasp and accept. We try to stay alive not only in our physical bodies, but also in our mental bodies. We want to preserve not only our lives, but also the lives of our thoughts and our conceptual sense of identity, which we often refer to as the ego. And that desire to preserve our mental models and conceptual sense of self brings us full circle back to the question that we're trying to get a handle on in this series and in this video specifically. We are lost in thought and confuse ourselves with a mental projection of ourselves, which we feel the need to protect as much as our physical bodies, creating a certain type of mental feedback loop in which we generate new thoughts to protect a sense of identity constructed by thoughts. We'll talk more about this mental feedback loop in future videos. This is why it's often called ego death, because once a thought-based sense of identity calcifies or solidifies, breaking that sense of identity open is essentially killing it before a new version emerges. And that, to the mind, feels as scary as actually facing death. Even if we come to some sort of acceptance about our mortality, except that we will someday die, we naturally want to live as long as possible. Now, a lot of the factors that determine how long we live are completely beyond our control, but there are some factors that we do have some control over. Some aspects of our survival can be affected by our choices and by our plans. Not addressing the things that we're capable of addressing could have negative impacts, cause more suffering, or even cut our lives short. The mind struggles to figure out what it can and cannot influence, what to take on and what to let go of. The Serenity Prayer comes to mind. The thinking mind has trouble discerning what is and is not in its domain of influence, and how to work together harmoniously with the total intelligence of the human system to address the vulnerabilities that we can do something about. This highlights this interaction of our fear with the lack of integration of the thinking mind. Without the clarity of where the mind is helpful and where it's a distraction, it tends to overwork, pulling our attention away from what we need to pay attention to in order to actually be safer. It believes it should figure everything out and predict every possible problem, so it goes crazy in the background, trying to put together the pieces of an infinitely large, constantly changing puzzle, all the while imagining problems that aren't actually happening and trying to impose order on an unruly set of impulses and motivations. Is it surprising that we feel stressed or anxious? Is it surprising that the constant stream of thinking is completely out of control? Is it surprising that we can't stop the intrusive flow of thoughts even when we want to stop it? We can't stop the momentum of the flow of thoughts for all of the reasons we talked about already and more, but get this. It's also because wanting to stop the flow of thoughts is, wait for it, just another thought. This is what I mean by flipping the question on its head. The person who thinks they want to stop thinking is a mentally constructed sense of self, effectively created by thoughts. It's an illusory sense of self that emerges from thinking that thinks it wants to stop thinking. Just as we can't put out fire with fire, we can't put out thoughts with more thoughts. This is a huge trap that I fell into when I first started to become aware of my compulsive thinking, and which I think most people fall into as well. It's one of the first variations of what I call the trap of knowing, which we'll break down in more depth in the next video. Now, this trap has many common variations, and it mutates as our understanding evolves. So learning to recognize it really makes the difference between coming out of the tricks of the ego or just making the ego even trickier. It's one of the most fundamental things to see clearly if we want to come out of the labyrinth of the mind and contact real life. And it's really easy to miss. I honestly wish I could have seen this next video, and really this whole video series, 15 years ago when I was really confused and falling into these traps all the time. So hopefully it can save you 15 years or at least some time in your path in harmonizing your mind and seeing through these tricks and traps. If you're finding these videos helpful or resonate with them on some level, consider subscribing to the Harmonious Reality newsletter, in which this series is just one part of a movement for cultivating more harmony internally and externally. Links for everything are in the description. Thanks for being here. Truly thank you for being here. I love you. See you in the next one.